Before she became known as Lucy's lovable sidekick, Vivian Vance was a force in her own right, determined, ambitious, and hungry for the stage. Born in 1909 in the small town of Cherryvale, Kansas, Vivian Roberta Jones grew up far from the glitter of Hollywood. Her early life was shaped by strict conservative values, with a mother who disapproved of her artistic dreams and a father who rarely showed support. But from a young age, Vivian was different. She had a voice, a presence, and most importantly, a burning desire to escape. After moving to Independence, Missouri, and later to Albuquerque, New Mexico, Vivian began using the stage name Vivian Vance as she worked in community theater. This wasn't just a name change, it was a reinvention. She broke free from her family's expectations and took her first real steps toward the spotlight. She knew she didn't fit the mold of a typical starlet, but that didn't stop her. She studied voice and acting, then packed up and left for New York, ready to chase the stage. Once in New York, things didn't happen overnight. Vance took odd jobs while auditioning relentlessly, often facing rejection for being too tall or too strong for delicate female roles. But she didn't give up. Her big break came when she joined the cast of several Broadway productions in the 1930s and 40s, earning critical acclaim for her comedic timing and powerful voice. She starred in The Voice of the Turtle, Anything Goes, and let's face it, performing alongside stars like Danny Kaye and Ethel Mertz. By the late 40s, she had firmly established herself in the theater world. But even then, success came with a cost. While Vivian was gaining traction professionally, her personal life remained turbulent. She went through 2 difficult marriages during this time, both of which were marked by emotional strain. One husband reportedly discouraged her career altogether, insisting she stay home and be a proper wife. She didn't listen. She never let anyone's expectations define her path. Still, despite her Broadway acclaim, Vance wasn't a household name, and she wanted more. She wanted television, even though it was risky and unknown for a theater actress at the time. In 1951, an audition changed her life. Lucille Ball was casting a new sitcom, I Love Lucy, and needed someone to play the neighbor, Ethel Mertz. Vivian's name was floated, but there was resistance. Ball thought she was too young and too pretty to play the role. But after a screen test that showed undeniable chemistry, Vance got the part. What she didn't realize was that the role of Ethel would make her famous, but would also become a box she'd spend the rest of her life trying to escape. When Vivian Vance landed the role of Ethel Mertz, she thought she'd finally found a breakthrough she'd spent years chasing. But what seemed like a dream job quickly became a double-edged sword. The sitcom I Love Lucy would change her life, but not in the way she imagined. From the very beginning, Lucille Ball had doubts about casting Vance. In fact, she flat out rejected her at first. The problem? Vivian was too attractive. Ball, fiercely protective of her spotlight, didn't want the audience to view her co-star as a threat or even as a peer. Lucy was supposed to be the center of attention, and Ethel was written as a frumpy, older neighbor, not a glamorous, stage-seasoned actress. The show's producers eventually convinced Ball to give Vance a screen test, and to her credit, she admitted the chemistry was undeniable. But the terms were clear. Vance had to downplay everything that made her stand out. To keep Lucy front and center, Vivian was asked to wear outdated, matronly clothing. She was instructed to gain weight, hide her natural beauty, and act far older than her age. Worse, she was paired with William Frawley, 22 years her senior, as her on-screen husband. The age difference wasn't subtle, and it sent a message. Ethel was supposed to be comic relief, not competition. Vivian went along with it. She accepted the wardrobe, the aging makeup, and the less-than-flattering characterization. She wanted the job, and she needed the paycheck. But over time, the compromises chipped away at her. She was a trained theater actress with a wide range, and now she was being told to stand in the background and make Lucy look good. She joked about it in interviews, calling herself the sacrifice lamb. But behind the humor was real pain. Privately, Vivian struggled with resentment. She respected Lucille Ball as a performer and gradually formed a friendship with her. But she couldn't ignore the fact that she had been forced to dull her shine. The very things that made her special were now considered threats on set. And the longer the show ran, the more she became Ethel, not just on screen, but in the eyes of the public. People on the street didn't call her Vivian anymore. They called her Ethel. They laughed when they saw her, expecting her to play the goofy, nagging housewife they loved on television. No one remembered her Broadway accolades or her early work as a serious actress. She had become a character, one she hadn't fully chosen. Worse, she had to play that character while suppressing her own insecurities. As the show gained fame, the pressure only mounted. Her appearance was constantly scrutinized. She was caught in a cruel paradox, celebrated for a role that stripped away her identity. And this identity crisis wasn't just emotional. It would take a toll on her mental health that she couldn't ignore. Behind every laugh track and perfectly timed punchline, Vivian Vance was holding herself together by a thread. While the world saw her as Ethel Mertz, the quirky, loyal neighbor, Vivian was quietly unraveling. The pressure to fit into the mold crafted by Love Lucy's producers wasn't just frustrating, it was suffocating. And soon, it became unbearable. Vivian had spent years refining her craft, working her way from small-town stages to Broadway. But by the time I Love Lucy reached its peak, she felt like a caricature of herself. The role of Ethel, while beloved by audiences, left Vivian feeling invisible. Her true identity, her artistry, ambition, and voice, was buried under layers of pancake makeup, outdated costumes, and sitcom tropes. And no one seemed to notice or care. But it wasn't just the show that wore her down. Vivian had been carrying emotional weight long before Lucy ever walked into her life. As a child, she was frequently scolded for being too dramatic. Her mother often made her feel ashamed for wanting a life in show business. That disapproval, planted early, haunted her into adulthood. Even as she achieved fame, that inner critic, fueled by childhood shame, never stopped whispering. By the mid-1950s, the cracks began to show. Vivian was exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually. The constant expectation to perform as someone she didn't recognize triggered intense anxiety and depression. Few knew the full extent of her pain, but it reached a breaking point when she suffered a nervous breakdown, something she kept hidden from the public eye. She didn't vanish from the show, though. She kept going. But behind the scenes, Vivian started seeing a therapist. In fact, she scheduled daily therapy sessions before arriving at the studio to film. It wasn't optional, it was survival. The therapy became a lifeline, a quiet act of rebellion against the crushing expectations of Hollywood. Vivian wasn't just battling the pressures of fame. She was also navigating an industry that didn't care about emotional well-being, especially for women. If she cracked under pressure, she risked being labeled unstable or difficult. Labels that could destroy a career overnight. So she smiled for the cameras, hit her marks, delivered the laughs, and then cried in private. What made it worse was that no one around her seemed to understand. Lucille Ball, while brilliant and trailblazing in her own right, wasn't known for emotional intimacy. William Frawley, her on-screen husband, was often distant or antagonistic. Vivian was surrounded by people, but still felt profoundly alone. Despite the growing darkness, she showed up every day, but the cost of being Ethel was growing. The more the world celebrated the character, the more Vivian lost touch with the woman behind the mask. And yet, the show had to go on. By the time I Love Lucy became the most watched show in America, Vivian Vance had become a household name, but not as herself. She was simply Ethel. No last name, no backstory, no personal identity. Just a quirky, slightly frumpy neighbor who always had a sarcastic remark and a roll of her eyes ready for Fred. The world loved her, but they didn't see her, and that, more than anything, began to eat away at her. Vivian had always dreamed of fame, but what she got wasn't recognition. It was erasure. Her success came with a strange twist. The more popular she became, the less people remembered who she actually was. Fans would approach her on the street with excitement, only to express disappointment that she looked too pretty in person. Some would even ask her why she wasn't heavier, or why she wasn't as old as she looked on TV. It was meant as flattery, but to Vivian, it stung. The version of herself that people admired was a fictional shell, and the media only made it worse. Articles praised her for her comedic timing, but they rarely mentioned her past achievements in Broadway theater. No one talked about the ambitious actress who once shared the stage with legends. To them, she was just a sidekick, always funny, always supportive, never the star. Interviews would start with questions about Lucy, then move on to Fred. Rarely did anyone ask what she thought or how she felt. The disconnect between the woman and the role created a kind of identity trap. On set, she had to constantly maintain the Ethel image. Off set, people still expected her to act like Ethel, charming, self-deprecating, and harmless. But Vivian wasn't harmless. She was smart, sharp, and deeply aware of how Hollywood worked. And what she saw wasn't pretty. She knew she had been typecast. Hollywood had labeled her as the older sidekick, and breaking out of that role was nearly impossible. Any attempt to reinvent herself was met with resistance. Casting directors only saw Ethel. Producers only saw Ethel. Even her fans, who claimed to love her, didn't want her to be anything but Ethel. And worst of all, she began to internalize it. Vivian started questioning whether she even could be anything else, whether all her years on the stage meant anything now, whether the woman inside, the artist, the fighter, still had a voice at all. At one point, she even considered leaving the industry entirely. She felt trapped in a performance that never ended. She was adored by millions, but completely misunderstood. That's a unique kind of loneliness, being surrounded by applause, but craving authenticity. But just when she thought about walking away, another offer came. It wasn't freedom, but it was familiar. Just when Vivian Vance thought she might finally step away from the shadow of Ethel, Hollywood pulled her right back in. When the Lucy show launched in 1962, Lucille Ball reached out. She wanted Vivian by her side again, not just for chemistry, but because the audience still couldn't get enough of their on-screen magic. At first, Vivian hesitated. She knew what was coming. The same jokes, the same character, and the same cycle of being overshadowed. But Vivian also knew something else. Television had given her a level of financial security she'd never had before. And more than that, she genuinely cared for Lucy. Despite the tension, despite the power imbalance, there was real affection there. So she agreed to return. But this time, there were conditions. Vivian refused to be called Ethel. She wanted a new character, a fresh name, and a different wardrobe. She even asked for better fashion choices to reflect who she really was, a stylish, sharp woman in her prime. Lucy agreed, mostly, but the audience didn't see a new character. They still saw Ethel, just with a new haircut and a slightly cooler wardrobe. The ghost of her past role followed her into every scene. And as the seasons wore on, the working relationship between Vivian and Lucy began to fray. They weren't equals on this new show. Lucy was now a powerful executive, calling the shots behind the scenes. Vivian? She was still in a supporting role. That dynamic, combined with years of pent-up frustration, led to clashes that were no longer easy to hide. At one point, insiders claimed their arguments grew so intense that producers had to separate them between scenes. Vivian wasn't afraid to push back anymore. She challenged scripts, questioned blocking, and openly voiced her fatigue with always being second. Lucy, used to having the final say, didn't take kindly to that. Still, there was a complicated kind of love between them. Lucy admired Vivian's wit, her timing, and her fierce loyalty, even if she never said it out loud. Vivian, despite her resentment, respected Lucy's brilliance and unmatched influence in a male-dominated industry. Their friendship was never simple. It was layered with admiration, competition, hurt feelings, and a history too tangled to unravel. Eventually, Vivian made a decision. She quit the Lucy show after just 3 seasons. No big announcement. No dramatic exit. She just walked away. She couldn't keep performing under the weight of an identity that wasn't her own. The set that had once been her ticket to fame had become a cage, and she was done being trapped inside it. But the world wasn't done with her just yet. The name Ethel still followed her, whether she liked it or not. And while she tried to move on, to find roles that reflected the real Vivian, the industry didn't make it easy. After leaving the Lucy show, Vivian Vance tried to find herself again, not as Ethel, not as a psychic, but as Vivian. She took on occasional acting roles, appeared in stage productions, and even did commercials. But the industry never stopped calling her Ethel. No matter where she went or what she did, she couldn't escape that identity. To the world, she was frozen in time as a sarcastic second banana neighbor. That legacy was a double-edged sword. It gave her a name, but it also robbed her of one. In her private life, things were just as complicated. Vivian had been married multiple times, searching for stability and partnership, but never quite finding it. Her 3rd marriage ended in heartbreak, and her 4th, though lasting until her death, was marked by long periods of separation due to her declining health. Despite the adoration she received from fans, she often felt alone, especially in her later years. Behind closed doors, Vivian was battling a far more personal fight, one that very few knew about until much later. In the early 1970s, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She kept it quiet, not wanting sympathy or headlines. She spent her entire career hiding pain behind a smile, and she continued doing it now. Even as the treatments drained her energy, even as the disease spread, she found ways to appear upbeat in public. She remained close with Lucille Ball through it all. Despite their earlier clashes, Lucy had become something more than a co-star. She was a part of Vivian's life in a way no one else was. In fact, one of the last times they saw each other was deeply emotional. Vivian was bedridden and frail, but when Lucy entered the room, she reportedly lit up, managing a smile and a quiet joke. It was like they were back on set, if only for a moment. Lucy later described that visit as one of the most painful and beautiful experiences of her life. Vivian passed away in 1979 at the age of 70. Her death was met with an outpouring of love from fans around the world. But what many didn't realize was how much of her had remained unseen, how much she had given behind the scenes, and how much she had endured in silence. She left behind more than reruns and laugh tracks. Vivian Vance carved out space for real women in comedy, flawed, brilliant, overlooked, and deeply human. She broke ground by being both funny and vulnerable, relatable yet unforgettable. And while Hollywood may have boxed her in, she managed, in her own quiet way, to break out of that box with grace. Even now, decades later, reruns of I Love Lucy still play. And with every laugh Ethel gets, a little piece of Vivian Vance lives on. Stronger than the character, deeper than the punchline. Vivian Vance wasn't just Ethel Mertz. That's the part history too often forgets. Yes, she gave us one of the most iconic psychic roles in television history. Yes, her comedic timing helped define the golden age of sitcoms. But behind the scenes, she was something even more rare, a woman who fought quietly but relentlessly for her right to be seen, respected, and remembered on her own terms. It's easy to dismiss her story as that of the lovable neighbor, the comic relief, the straight woman to Lucille Ball's chaos. But when you dig deeper, you find someone who reshaped what it meant to be a woman in comedy at a time when Hollywood offered very few choices. Vivian didn't fit the mold, and she refused to be molded. She pushed back against being made to look older, against the idea that she had to play second fiddle just because she wasn't the leading lady type. And while she may not have shattered every barrier, she cracked enough of them to let the next generation through. Her battles, whether with typecasting, with illness, or with personal demons, were often fought out of sight, but they weren't lost. Vivian proved that you could be funny and still be serious, that you could steal scenes without stealing the spotlight, that you could be remembered, even if the industry tried to forget the person behind the performance. What makes her story so powerful isn't just the laughter she gave us. It's the pain she hid to give it. It's the way she endured being underestimated and still delivered performances that audiences love for decades. It's the courage to walk away when the fame no longer felt worth the cost. And it's the grace she showed even in her final days, still smiling, still sharp, even when her body was failing her. In many ways, Vivian Vance never truly got the credit she deserved while she was alive. But maybe that's a final irony. Her legacy lives not in awards or flashy tributes, but in the quiet admiration of those who see her for who she really was. Every actress who refuses to be boxed in, every comic who demands to be more than the punchline, every performer who insists on being seen beyond the role they play, they're all part of the legacy Vivian helped build. So the next time you hear someone laugh at a classic I Love Lucy episode, remember what it cost to make those moments happen. Behind every laugh track, there was a real woman navigating heartbreak, self-doubt, and a system that wasn't built for her. And somehow, she still made us laugh. Vivian Vance didn't just survive the golden age of television. She left her mark on it, not as Ethel, as herself.